This is one of the most expensive things you can order at a restaurant. But 300 years ago, if you were a prisoner, or a servant, or just poor, you were eating this against your will. In fact, it was so hated, servants in America made their bosses sign a written promise. Don't feed us this more than 3 times a week. That food was lobster. And what happened next is insane. It got so hated, it almost disappeared. Then one lie turned it into a luxury. And then it got so valuable, 2 countries almost went to war over it. Stick around, because that war is real, and it's coming up. In 1622, servants in the American colonies did something no one does today. They revolted. Not over pay, not over hours, over lobster. They were being fed it so often, it was written into law that they couldn't be served it more than 3 times a week. Today, that same animal costs more per pound than steak. Something happened in between that turned the trash of the sea into the trophy of the table. And it involves a war, a con man, and a single railroad line that changed what an entire country considered food. Picture the coast of Massachusetts in the 1600s. After a storm, lobsters didn't just live in the water. They washed up on shore in piles 2 feet high. They were so abundant, so cheap, and honestly, so unappetizing to the colonists, who thought of them as giant sea insects, that they became the default food for people with no other choice: prisoners, indentured servants, and the poor. Lobster shells found outside old servant quarters in Massachusetts and Maine are one of the reasons historians believe the 3 times a week servant clause wasn't just a rumor. It shows up in multiple colonial contracts. But here's where it gets strange. The same animal that disgusted rich colonists was, at that exact time, considered a delicacy. 4,000 miles away in parts of Europe, 2 totally different worlds, 2 totally different verdicts on the same creature. Fast forward 2 centuries, lobster is still basically prison food until the 1880s, when railroads start connecting the rural Maine coast to wealthy cities like Boston and New York. Inns along the rail lines needed something exotic to serve rich tourists who had never seen the ocean. So innkeepers did something clever and a little dishonest. They served lobster not as cheap food, but as an exclusive coastal delicacy these city visitors had never tasted before. The tourists didn't know its history. To them, it wasn't leftover prisoner food. It was a rare regional treasure. Wait, it gets crazier. The rebrand worked so well, canning companies caught on next. And that's when lobster stopped being regional and started becoming a business empire. By the early 1900s, canning companies were shipping lobster meat across the entire United States. But overfishing from the canning boom crashed wild populations so badly that by the 1920s, lobster was becoming genuinely scarce for the first time in history. And this is the twist. Scarcity did what marketing alone couldn't. A food once so plentiful it was fed to inmates was now rare enough to command real prices. Restaurants in New York started putting it on menus next to caviar and champagne. The poverty food had fully flipped into a status symbol, not because it tasted different, but because it had simply become harder to get. 1961. Off the coast of Brazil, French fishing boats began hauling in enormous quantities of a lobster species living deep on the continental shelf. Brazil claimed those waters and those lobsters as its own natural resource. France disagreed, arguing the lobsters swam along the ocean floor and were fair game in international waters. Diplomacy failed. France sent warships. Brazil sent its own navy to intercept them. For weeks, two nations stood at the edge of actual armed conflict over lobster. Newspapers around the world started calling it exactly what it looked like: the Lobster War. It was eventually resolved through negotiation, not gunfire. But for one tense month, a creature once thrown away as garbage had two governments prepared to fight over who owned it. A food that colonial servants once refused to eat more than 3 nights a week had become something nations were willing to send battleships over. And the story isn't finished. Right now, warming ocean temperatures in the Gulf of Maine, one of the fastest warming bodies of water on Earth, are pushing lobster populations north toward Canada and away from the very state whose identity is built on them. Maine's lobster industry, worth over $500 million a year, is facing the real possibility that in a few decades, the lobster boom could end the way it started, with almost none left to catch. The same creature that servants rebelled against, that a railroad rebranded, that canning companies turned into luxury, and that two nations nearly went to war over, might not survive the century in the waters where its whole story began. Lobster's story isn't really about seafood. It's about how quickly the world can rewrite what something is worth. From garbage to gift to global conflict, without the lobster itself ever changing at all. The animal didn't evolve. The ocean didn't change. People did. And that's exactly the part nobody ever teaches you. That's what Taste Roots is. Every episode, one food, one buried truth, and the history that got lost somewhere between the marketing and the mythology. If these are the kinds of stories you want, the ones big brands and history books quietly leave out, hit subscribe right now. New episodes drop every week, and every single one will change how you look at something on your plate. Because the next one might be the most unbelievable yet. Next time, the spice that was once worth more than gold, and the empire that was built entirely on lying about where it came from. Don't miss it.